At 9:02 this morning, the money cleared. Congratulations. You now own a glass thread running across the floor of the Atlantic. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars. It carries a slice of the world's internet, and it has roughly 25 years to earn that money back before newer cables make it less valuable, even if yours still works perfectly. But your first serious threat is not a hacker, a hostile government, or a shark. It is a fishing boat dragging an anchor through the wrong patch of ocean. So what exactly did you buy? And can it survive long enough to pay you back? The obvious answer is a cable. The real answer is an entire system. There is the wet plant, the fiber on the seafloor, the protective armor near shore, and the repeaters placed along the route to keep the signal moving across thousands of miles. Then there is the dry plant, the landing stations, power equipment, monitoring systems, and transmission hardware on both continents. Legally, it gets even stranger. One continuous cable can pass through territorial waters, exclusive economic zones, and the high seas. The cable never changes, but the rules around it do. You may not even own the whole thing. Many systems are shared by a consortium. That means you bought a percentage of the capacity, a percentage of the costs, and a percentage of the problems. So your receipt does not really say one cable. It says glass, electronics, real estate, licenses, contracts, and a very long list of responsibilities. And every part of that system starts aging the moment the transfer clears, even if nothing breaks. The first thing your new cable does is get older. Not because the glass is rotting, because the economics are. Every new cable adds more capacity to the route. Newer systems move more data with better equipment. And when supply grows faster than customers can use it, the price of bandwidth falls. That means your cable can work exactly as designed and still lose value. Its physical life may be measured in decades. Its profitable life depends on how quickly newer, cheaper capacity arrives. But before the cable can earn anything, someone has to commit to using it. And those customers enter the story much earlier than you might expect. Picture a company like Amazon needing a dedicated lane across the Atlantic. It may commit before construction even begins because a project this expensive often needs a major anchor customer to prove to lenders that real demand exists. So you are not building the cable first and hoping tenants show up later. You are pre-selling part of it to make the cable financeable in the first place. Once it is operating, a smaller telecom might buy managed or lit capacity. You run the transmission equipment. The customer buys the service. A hyperscaler may want something closer to control of an entire fiber pair, installing its own equipment and managing its own traffic. That creates an uncomfortable reality. Your most valuable customers are also the ones most capable of operating without you, and the payment may not look like monthly rent. A customer can pay a large amount upfront for a long-term right to use capacity, then contribute ongoing maintenance charges. That gives you cash early, but your obligations keep running long after the first payment arrives. Owners also do not activate every lane on day one. A new cable can be only 5% lit and still carry far more traffic than an older cable running at full capacity. But unlit capacity is not spare bandwidth sitting there, ready for rerouting. Much of it remains theoretical until you buy more equipment at the landing stations. Your cable contains future capacity. Unlocking it costs more money. And the final problem is the biggest one. Major technology companies increasingly help build or directly own cables themselves. Your dream customers are slowly becoming your competitors. They can stop buying from you. Your operating obligations cannot stop with them. Now the brochure starts getting expensive. You need landing stations operating on both sides of the ocean, engineers monitoring the signal, spare cable and transmission equipment, insurance, regulatory compliance, and access to a specialized repair fleet that you hope never has to visit your route. Then there is the law protecting your purchase. The American criminal statute traces back to the 19th century. Serious negligent damage can still carry a maximum fine of only $500. Deliberate damage raises that to $5,000, although you can separately pursue civil damages. The repair itself can cost 7 figures. And when a repair ship is working, nearby vessels are supposed to give it a wide berth. But the old treaty can give fishing boats up to 24 hours to clear their gear. The law protecting the internet is apparently very concerned about being polite. Unfortunately, politeness does not stop an anchor. Then, one morning, the signal drops. You may have heard that sharks bite internet cables. The image became so famous that a Google product manager once said its Trans-Pacific cables used a Kevlar-like protective layer after shark bite concerns. Great visual, terrible risk model. Modern industry records show that sharks are essentially no longer a threat. Your real predator owns a fishing boat. Most cable faults come from ordinary human activity, especially anchors and trawling gear snagging a line that the crew may not even know is there. Your engineers send a pulse through the fiber. The damaged point reflects it back, allowing them to estimate where the break occurred. A repair ship heads to the site. And this is where one of the most advanced communication systems on Earth starts to look strangely medieval. Depending on the depth and conditions, the crew may use a remotely operated vehicle or drag a heavy grappling hook across the seafloor to locate and retrieve the cable. They haul one end onto the deck and seal it so seawater cannot travel farther inside. Then they retrieve the other end, cut away the damaged section, and bring the cable into a controlled room on the ship. Inside, technicians splice hair-thin fibers back together. After testing the signal, they lower the repaired cable back to the seabed. The process can take days, plus the time needed for the ship to reach the fault. Meanwhile, your customers are rerouting traffic onto other systems. The repair meter is running, and everyone is discovering whether you purchased enough redundancy. You spent hundreds of millions of dollars on one of humanity's most advanced machines. It just lost a fight with an anchor. Now comes the expensive question. Can the business survive an event that the cable network considers routine? Run the same purchase twice. In the base case, your existing contracts hold, new capacity arrives gradually, and the cable keeps most of its profitable life. At your purchase price, it needs to recover about $12.5 million every year just to repay the acquisition. That is before financing, staff, landing stations, maintenance, or repairs. Now, change one variable. Suppose newer cables arrive faster than expected and wipe out nearly half of your profitable window. Nothing physically fails. Your customers can simply buy faster capacity somewhere else. The yearly recovery hurdle jumps sharply while your operating obligations barely change. That is not a theoretical risk. During the dot-com boom, Global Crossing built a huge fiber network on the belief that internet demand would keep outrunning supply. At its peak, the company was valued at roughly $47 billion. It never recorded an annual profit. When the market was flooded with capacity, bandwidth prices collapsed, and the company entered bankruptcy. And that is the crucial point. The internet did not disappear. Demand kept growing. Cable supply simply grew faster. The cables worked. The pricing model did not. Its founder had reportedly sold hundreds of millions of dollars of stock before the collapse. Investors and employees were left holding the rest, and new cable construction slowed dramatically for years. That same risk is sitting on your scoreboard today. Customers do not pay according to how difficult your cable was to build. They pay according to supply and competition on that route. That means a shorter Atlantic cable can command lower prices than a longer Pacific cable simply because more capacity already crosses the Atlantic. So the question is not, does the world need internet? Of course it does. The real question is whether the world needs your route, at your price, for long enough to repay what you spent. So, did you buy the world's most powerful toll road? Not exactly. You bought a shrinking share of one route across the Atlantic. You received some cash early, inherited decades of operating responsibility, and placed a bet that demand will grow faster than competitors can build newer capacity. The cable can work perfectly, carry critical traffic, and still become a bad investment. Because owning something the world depends on is not the same as owning something the world will keep paying you for. And the next asset is even harder to repair, because it is already orbiting Earth.